funny microphone here, and I'm short, so I'm gonna, okay. Welcome to our presentation focused on teens and adults, and we have titled it Beyond Skill Acquisition, Looking Outside of Observable Behavior in Teens and Adults on the Autism Spectrum. So I just want to make sure that you're in the right group, because there's another group going on, although even if you're in the wrong group, we want you to stay. So. Did everybody get a handout? I'm sorry, is there anybody who did not get a handout? Okay, good. Just a couple of actually quick notes is you also have a session feedback sheet with your handout. If you could fill that out just really quick at the end and hand it to the adorable blonde back there. We take feedback really seriously. We want to know what you are interested in and what questions you have. We have a bi-monthly radio show that we do, and any questions that you ever want to ask, you can post them on our Facebook, and you have information about our show through the cards and the handouts. And this upcoming show on Monday, October 8th, we're going to do a total Q&A show. So good opportunity to get all your questions out. And again, the information on how to listen and listen to past shows is in your information packet as well.
Just to clarify, it's a radio show and a podcast, so it's available online.
Yes. Another note about questions, we are going to leave time at the end for questions, so if you can hold your questions until the end, we'll be happy to answer any questions you have. So, okay, well, my name is Kim Isaac. I'm a certified RDI consultant, and I've been working with people on the autism spectrum for 16 years now, and been involved in RDI for almost 10 years. And I know, almost 10 years. And I have a bachelor's degree in psychology and a master's degree in counseling studies, and I specialize in working with teenagers and adults on the spectrum, which is how I met my Paul, my co-host here. This is Paul Loudon, and he is 29 years old, and he was diagnosed with Asperger's at age 23. And through our work together and as it's evolved, we've started doing this radio show, and it's very insightful because he has a lot of perspective to offer through his life experience, and between the two of us, it makes for a really informational and insightful show. So we hope you get on board with that and start listening.
Please talk.
Okay, we're going to get started.
So, to start with, we're going to start from the very beginning with the situation that most parents or people find themselves in when they have a child who's on the spectrum. And you start by noticing something that child is doing that makes you ask the question, is this autism? And the important thing to remember here is that this question always comes from seeing symptoms. You're seeing the child doing something, some behavior, some pattern of speech, maybe just not making friends, and it causes a parent or teacher or just someone around this person to think, you know, there's something out of the ordinary here, there's something wrong, and to finally, eventually ask the question, is this autism? And what's really important here is that all of these symptoms that are observed are observable behaviors. They are things that you can see. So that is the core of what happens when autism is first noticed and is diagnosed, is that everything is about observable behaviors.
So let's just clarify some classic symptoms or observable behavior that some of you may have some experience with the people that you are working with on the spectrum. So again, just to clarify, observable behavior is behavior that you notice through things that you see, like actions that you see them take, or things that you hear, things that they might say or not say sometimes. And a lot of times we teach to the observable behavior. So based on what we see, we do something in response. And some of the commonly observed behaviors that you may see are things like unusual or unexpected physical actions, maybe walking away in the middle of an interaction when it's not quite over, or fleeing the situation. Sometimes it's not a wander, but sometimes it's like kind of a grand exit or avoidance. There are also different social things, lack of eye contact is probably a big one that you guys experience. Seemingly uninterested or avoidant social behavior. Communication-related things like maybe excessive talking or means to end type communication, where they're communicating about things that they need or special interests, things like that, versus reciprocal conversation. And another thing related to communication is the volume of the voice, and I'm coming across this more and more in my work with adults, is having trouble managing the volume at different times. And also just responses to social interactions that may be unusual or kind of surprising. One example that I can think of is I have a client that I work with who we go out a lot. We go to restaurants and stuff. And we went to like Baja Fresh or something. And we both ordered our food and we sat down and I was like, oh, my taco looks really good. And we sat down and he's looking at my food and he's looking at his food and he's like, but what did you order? And it was like clearly a taco, and I said, well, it was a taco. And he wanted me to say it exactly how it was written on the menu. And so we kind of had this response issue where I did say it was a taco with lettuce and beans and tomatoes, so it was kind of like, okay, it was kind of a difficult, we worked through it, but the response to some of my communication was responded to with some kind of unusual communication and reply.
So, as I said before, diagnostic criteria are often based on observable symptoms. This leads a lot of parents to see the symptoms as a problem to be solved. My child is not able to do this, so I need to help him be able to do this. My child doesn't look me in the eyes, so I need to make sure my child can look me in the eyes. My child doesn't make friends, so I need to come up with a way to help him make friends. A lot of parents will approach autism as a checklist of symptoms that need to be solved. It's sort of human nature. We all see a problem in front of us and we want to solve it. The problem is that these observable behaviors, the things that the child is doing, all have an underlying mental process that leads to them. The child is not making friends because the child doesn't understand the social situations that lead to the development of friendship. The child isn't making eye contact because the child doesn't understand what eye contact means to other people. It's different than what the child thinks it means to himself. So a lot of times parents will see this checklist of symptoms, and they'll be looking for treatments that are based around solving these symptoms. They'll think autism is a lack of eye contact. Autism is not making friends, and not necessarily grasp that there's an underlying condition that creates these things. And so when looking for treatments or solutions, they'll look for something that's specifically tailored to the set of symptoms they observe, rather than the underlying condition that is the real cause for these symptoms.
Added a quote in here by Aristotle. I saw it, and it reminded me very much of RDI, and I just remembered how important it is that in order to treat something in the most efficient way, we really have to understand it clearly and identify it clearly. So it's important that we become very deliberate observers and of ourselves and the people that we're working with, and understanding their development is a very important process in helping them to develop and grow. So one of the big sort of conundrums when I work with teenagers is being mindful of the fact that despite their chronological age, they have a lot of different developmental ages as well. And it's tricky because thinking back to the observable behavior, even physically, you might see this teenager, this man, who clearly looks like a man, a grown-up, but socially and emotionally is quite young, is much younger. And it's tricky. And a lot of times when, by the ages that they are in teens and adults, they've also learned a lot of skills. They've learned a lot of academics. Not always. I'm sure there are some of you out there that that's not the case. But so academically, they're at one developmental level. Socially, emotionally, they're at a different one. Cognitively, and yesterday how Dr. Gutstein was talking about higher level processes that don't develop. Basically, when that's not happening, if you were to do like a brain scan, that brain in terms of the connections, would look more like a younger child. So there are parts to a person on the spectrum who's an older person who is still very developmentally young. And it's tricky because we see this behavior and we want to teach, as Paul was saying, to what we see. And it's very important that we start observing and separating out, okay, what is appropriate? Like, this person may be very much a teenager in some ways. You know, and there are factors like hormones and, you know, the environment maybe that he or she is in school, you know, that affect, you know, their needs and wants. And, you know, teens and adults have the need for autonomy and independence, and it's very tricky because here we are talking about learning through relationships, and it's like, wow, how do we balance this out? And so part of it is really separating out, okay, what is it I'm seeing, and where does it fit? And your RDI consultant will be able to help you do that in order for you to treat things in the most effective way. So, kind of just reflecting this slide, I kind of did a little recap of some of the things that Dr. Gustine spoke about yesterday, is just remembering that, so you have this teen or an adult, and you have to remember, okay, how did this person develop, and how did they develop differently than I did? So you have, you know, from birth, as humans, we start developing our brains the moment we're born. So our brains start to grow and get strong. And different parts of the brain are responsible for different things, different functions. And the key here is that in typical development, bridges are formed between the regions. And that's part of the neural integration. I like to kind of think of it as bridges. So they're kind of like talking to each other, different parts of the brain. And so what happens is as we grow older, we have a certain number and strength of those bridges, and that's where we learn to think before we learn to speak, or, you know, skills and things like that. So if you have a teenager or an adult on the spectrum, you have a situation where there are regions of the brain that are really strong in some areas, but you have less and weaker pathways connected. And so that's what leads to things like difficulty being flexible, you know, difficulty evaluating, making decisions, things like that. And a big problem that comes along with that is they don't understand why a lot of times they're either being taught something, social or emotional, what the value is, things like that. And it becomes kind of demotivating, because a lot of times our best interest is, okay, we want to teach these people things, you know, socially, emotionally, how to be more flexible, things like that. And because there's no value to it a lot of times for them, they don't see, you know, what the benefit is. And so a lot of times they become kind of resistant or withdrawn, you know, avoidant, because it doesn't really make a lot of sense. And so it's really important that we start to think about the concepts of behavior in terms of there's a what to behavior and there's a why. And in my work with teens and adults, teaching the why has been one of the most important things that I've realized and that I really focus on. Because once they start to understand the why, it makes it easier for them to understand, okay, well, this is why I'm doing this. It's not that somebody's trying to, you know, make me work all day or, you know, overwhelm me with demands. Or, you know, there's more to it than that. There's value to it. So, shifting gears a little bit, we're going to kind of give you a chance to explore this idea of the difference between the what and the why. Okay, so we're going to give your minds a chance to think about some things. And we're going to call this the Thinking About Thinking exercise. And so, in just a minute, Paul's going to share some of his life experience. And afterward, we're going to talk about a couple of these scenarios. So you can kind of, in your minds, decide to pick one of these three things to start thinking about the whats of these examples and the whys.
So I'm going to start by telling you just a little bit more about who I am first. As Kim told you, I'm 29. When I was younger, from birth through about 18, we moved around a lot. My dad worked in oil, so we found ourselves moving every 2 to 4 years to different places. Among these were other countries, and so everywhere we went, there was sort of a feeling of Well, there's nothing really wrong with Paul. He's just adapting. He's left his friends behind. He's making new friends. It's a new place, a new school. So there was always the social slowness that you might expect of someone on the spectrum. But there was always also an obvious reason that seemed to indicate why it was happening and made it harder for someone to catch any sort of disorder. So at one point along, I was, this was 7th, maybe 6th grade, I'm not entirely certain when this happened. I do remember the event rather clearly. But I'd had a homework assignment that a teacher had given me. And I had chosen not to do it because it didn't really interest me. It was something that I felt I knew, and it didn't seem that important in terms of grade or anything at the time. So I chose consciously not to do it. Now, to me, this was a very simple cost-benefit analysis kind of thing. That, you know, the time I was going to spend on this homework assignment was better spent somewhere else. I wasn't going to learn much from it. It wasn't going to hurt me too much. But when I got back to school and the teacher found I hadn't done the assignment, they were very upset with me. They were so upset that they took me to another room and asked me, Paul, why didn't you do this assignment? And I told them, well, I didn't want to. And unfortunately, I didn't understand that to the teacher this was an issue of respect. That the teacher had given you an assignment as a person in authority, and that it was disrespectful not to do the assignment. And so he becomes more upset. He looks at me and he's clearly agitated, and I have no idea why he's agitated. And I'm not getting agitated because I answered truthfully, what more does he want from me? And so through a series of questions and answers, this whole situation escalated to the point where the teacher was yelling at me, and I was thoroughly confused. I had no idea what was going on because to me, I couldn't understand why he was so upset. I told him why I had chosen not to do this assignment. And the teacher was, lost because to me, it was all about what I had done, what I hadn't done. To him, it was about why I hadn't done it. That the importance wasn't the assignment, the importance was this relationship between the teacher and the student where you trust the teacher to tell you what's important and why, and you do that because they know better or have more experience. But no one had ever really talked to me about this, that I didn't understand the reasoning for a lot of these things. And so I found myself lost. And this happened all throughout school, but this is one particularly memorable situation where I regularly didn't do assignments, and no one ever really understood why I wasn't doing these assignments. I got a lot of, well, Paul, you're so bright, why aren't you doing the work? I had 1 year in math where I literally scored between 95 and 105 on every test we took. That the teacher was very fond of extra credit questions, and I really understood the math. That same year I also did no math homework at all. Not a single piece of homework, because I realized that he only randomly collected them, and they were with a very small part of the grade. So that year I did fairly well in math, but I also was doing what I chose to do. And this has proven, a problem that I never really understood the point of homework. I never really understood so many things I encountered in the world, because it was always a situation of people kept telling me what to do, but never why we're supposed to be doing it. I never really understood underneath that when you're in a social encounter with someone, you say, how are you doing? Not necessarily because you want to know the answer to that, but because it's putting the other person at ease. That everything in life has two parts, what and why. And I was never really aware of the why until I received my diagnosis, and I started realizing that I was seeing life in a fundamentally different way than other people. And that from that point I could start working on developing this idea of there is a why, and it's different for me than for them. That what we do should be the same, but the why we're doing it is often different. That I come from a different original point than they do, and that understanding the why of the people around me makes both me and them much more comfortable.
And Paul's example, I see this often. I work with a 47-year-old man who was actually just diagnosed with autism as well. And he has 3 master's degrees, and he's been fired from every job he's ever had out of college. And it's not because he's not bright. I mean, obviously he's pretty darn bright. And he's very sweet. He has a nice personality, but he has absolutely no awareness of, one, how, when to employ certain rules. He's good at following rules, but he doesn't know when to use what. He doesn't have that flexible type thinking. He has a strong drive to be social, but he doesn't know really how to do it or why some of his behavior is off-putting. When I first met him, and if I didn't know he had autism, I might have been a little bit startled or frightened, to be honest. And even as a professional, sometimes I have to remind myself, okay, this is what I'm really seeing. You know, I meet him, our first meeting, he starts what I would perceive as yelling. I don't know why I can't keep a job, and everybody thinks that I'm so rude, you know, and he's just kind of, I felt like this blast, like this huge wind of yelling just kind of came over me. And I was like, okay, you know, there's a lot for me to observe here and really listen to and spend a lot of time with him to kind of help him sort through some of these things. And as it turns out, you know, he was very frustrated and depressed at this point, you know, to be honest, because here he is, he said, I went to school. Not only did I go to school, I kept going to school. And all my life, I thought that if I go get my college degree, that I would have this great job, I'd make a ton of money, I'd get married, I'd have friends. I mean, he had the whole picture in his mind, and he wants it really badly. And he says, I brush my teeth every day, I change my underwear. I mean, he's telling me all this stuff, and I'm like, wow, okay. He goes, but I'm still failing. I'm depressed. I'm afraid to be around people now because I have no idea where I'm going wrong. And I feel like I'm being as honest and rule following as I possibly can, and it's just not getting me anywhere. It's not getting me to the place that I want to be. And he's like, why should I even bother? And there were some moments actually where he was, contemplating suicide, and he had no money. One of the things that I encounter with some of the adults I work with, because they're so much older, they don't always have parents or support, around, and that makes it even harder. But I see this a lot. That type of thing, where you have people, like Paul, who is a hard worker, who does the right thing, who's smart. He actually calculated here, okay, well, I don't really need this homework assignment to make my grade good. I mean, he's very intelligent, but...
And just to clarify, I didn't always have good grades either. There were a lot of classes that I scraped by almost not failing, but...
Really?
Yeah, but a lot of those, it was almost failing, because I wasn't that interested in that class, but I managed to do just enough to scrape by, rather than, I probably could have gotten a much higher grade. I mean, just for reference, I had 20 points short of a perfect score on my SATs, but barely graduated from high school.
I'm glad you said that. I think that's important. Yeah.
So, I do that feeling of I'm doing the right thing, or I'm doing what I'm supposed to. You ask people, what am I supposed to do? And then you listen to it, and you trust it. If they tell you that you're supposed to do your homework so that you can learn things, then that's why you're doing it. Even though the real reason is you're supposed to do your homework so that you have good grades, because those good grades are important to college entries or other things. So a lot of times it's an issue of trust. You trust the people around you, and they have this assumption that you'll understand the deeper meaning of a lot of things. That there's layers of meanings on everything anyone says to you. And on the spectrum, a lot of times you just listen to the words. I mean, and people understand that I just listen to the words, but even then, they don't really realize how many things they're leaving unsaid.
And this kind of goes back to, we're talking about the different developmental ages of teens and adults. A lot of times when you see, someone like Paul, who is very articulate, very intelligent, you would automatically assume that all of the other developmental things that were supposed to happen happened. And so if something's not happening, it's very confusing, it's frustrating. People may get angry. Paul's going to be frustrated because there's such a miscommunication in a sense, or like a disconnect of, okay, this person, 20 points shy on a perfect score of the SATs, but what about all this other stuff? And that can cause a lot of frustration on both sides, on both parties that you interact with. And the thing is, a lot of times that does cause, some depression and social phobia, because if you think about it, if you were giving, with what you're doing everything you know to do, from your standpoint, and it's never good enough, and it's not working. When you were told it was supposed to work, it was supposed to work, like, what more is there? And so when you don't understand on both ends, people who are supporting people on the spectrum need to understand the why in order to teach it to the people on the spectrum.
And that's true. It's really important that the people who are not on the spectrum also understand the why, because one of the most depressing things that happens to me, one of the most frustrating things that happens to me, is when I upset someone and I don't understand why they're upset, it is almost impossible for me to then find out. If I ask them, why are you upset? They become angry with me for not knowing why they're upset, for not empathizing or understanding what has made them upset. So as someone on the spectrum, it can be very, very hard and nerve-wracking to ask for help from those around you, because you learn quickly that asking for help, if you don't do it the right way, it just makes the situation worse. So you find yourself withdrawing a lot more because you can't look for help. The people that you need help from don't understand enough about what you're asking, and you don't have the tools to ask them correctly, that it's really hard to get help.
And I think especially, sometimes people say, I don't really like to use these terms, higher functioning, lower functioning, I don't really like to use it, but I think everybody here can kind of have a sense of what I would mean by that. And a lot of times, I think the teens and adults that are, higher functioning have it so much worse than the ones that are lower functioning. Because you look at them, back to the observable behavior, you're thinking, okay, this must be intentional. You are lazy, you are, not trying, you don't care type stuff. And that's not true. And so that causes a lot of additional problems. So it kind of creates like a little bit of a snowball. So not only do you have some of the autism-related things, but now you have some extra things on top of it as a result of this atypical feedback system that starts to occur and then snowball. You want to say anything else about that? Okay.
Can I ask a question?
If it's quick, otherwise we'll take questions at the end.
I was just amazed to listen to your story, Paul, and I know you're very intelligent, but I'm sure you probably experienced some times of adversity, and you were frustrated. How did you work through that? Did you let off steam? How did you...
For me, it's very much finding something that's dependable, that follows rules. I like books, video games, things like that, where I know what's going to happen. So I just need time where I'm in an environment where nothing is going to surprise me. And that helps me cool down, come back down to a level where I can start interacting comfortably with people again.
Okay, so let's try this exercise. I know you all were probably mesmerized by Paul, and you probably forgot we were going to do this. That's okay, it happens. It happens to me too. So, thinking about thinking. So the what and the why. So we have these three events, I guess you could say. Planning a vacation, watering plants, and meeting a friend for coffee. So we're going to ask for some participation. Let's pick one. Paul, which one should we pick to start with?
I don't know.
All right, Susan, what should we pick to start?
Oh, planning a vacation. Let's do it.
Yeah, all right, let's do it. We're in San Diego. Okay, planning a vacation. Okay, so let's think about what are some skills that would be involved in planning a vacation. So the what's. This is the what's that we're talking about.
What clothes to take?
I'm sorry, oh, what clothes to take? Yeah, okay, what clothes to take. How would you evaluate what clothes to take, though?
Warm climate, cold climate?
Yeah, yeah. You gotta know, you gotta know where you're going. You have to evaluate the climate. So now we're already starting to get into the why. You can see it was kind of like a package deal on something like this, especially when it involves planning, because planning involves evaluation and, like Dr. Gustin was talking about yesterday, is integrating the things that you know, knowing what you know, and putting them kind of into a single packet. With people on the spectrum, it's stored individually. And so it's very hard. The single packet is what makes it flow, is the evaluation, is the why, is the flexibility, things like that.
And I'm just going to chime in here with something that may have gotten overlooked, is also what kind of place you're going to. Like, there's a difference between city clothes and country clothes. Even if they're warm, there are some things, a jacket, like a sports jacket, might be appropriate for city, but not for trekking around, that would be cold clothes. Or clothes that look nice versus clothes that look normal in case you're going somewhere overseas where you're afraid of getting pickpocketed or otherwise. So, this is one of those cases where, when someone says warm or cold, if I weren't aware that, I need to think more about it, I would just think, okay, let me split my clothes into piles of warm or cold, and pick my favorite, warm weather clothes, and not think deeper into the situation. That there are other considerations, in this case, some of them are social, the social level of the place I'm going to. Some of them are very real physical things, plants can catch on things. But, there's just the variety of other questions that are questions that might not get asked when you're just trusting someone and thinking only about the what.
And so it seems like we're kind of starting here with the why, so let's go with that for a second. So planning a vacation, you have to decide where to go, okay, as you said. From there, once you know where to go, you have to kind of consider some of the things you may be doing in order to know what to pack, as you're saying. If you're going on this, hiking trip where it's going to be kind of casual and informal the whole time, you're not going to really need to pack, a nicer outfit or clothes. But once you think about what activities you are going to be doing, once you evaluate that, you will make a different decision about the what once you've thought about some of those other things. Anybody else have any thoughts to add? Yes.
How much money do I need?
Ooh, how much money do you need? Good one. So how would you evaluate that?
How many days are you going to
How many days? That's a good one.
How much am I going to eat out?
How much you're going to eat out? Who said that? Good one. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, how much you're going to eat out?
Who do you want to go with?
Who do you want to go with? That's another good one. Yeah, some trips might be better to take certain people than others. I'm thinking of Gail and I. We had a little girls' trip that would have been appropriate for just girls. We didn't invite the guys. Those are things, if you think about it, actually, the first things that you guys are thinking of are actually the whys, because that dictates the actions that you're going to take after that. So if you can imagine living in a world or operating from a place where it's the opposite, it would be very hard to move yourself along through life. It would be very hard because you would have missing pieces to the things that were right in front of you.
And that's sort of the case is, with vacation, someone on the spectrum might learn what you're supposed to do as a checklist, that you're supposed to make sure you have enough money, you're supposed to make sure this, that, and the other. And there can be that lack of going a step further, of going, well, why do I need to make sure I have enough money? And that helps you think of other contingencies where you might not have enough money, where, we had, how many days am I going? Am I going with people? Am I going to eat out? How much money do I need a day? But when you go, why do I need enough money? I need enough money to make sure that there's never any point where I don't have money. So maybe I should bring a little more than that in case something goes wrong. Maybe I should bring some money specifically for the purpose of leaving in the hotel safe in case my wallet gets taken. Maybe I should make sure to always have cab fare in the bottom of my shoes, so I should bring just that much extra. That when you start thinking about why do I need to have enough money? Why do I need to think about who I go with? Why do I need to do all of these steps? You start thinking about more in depth. And, these are all things that, people might overlook, but at the same time, when you're on the spectrum, you're just more likely to overlook anything you haven't been told explicitly about until you culture this thought process of every time I'm doing something, I need to think about why I'm doing it, not just what I'm doing.
If you remember from yesterday talking about the value of it, experiencing what you're experiencing, the information that you take, and using it for future experiences. That's a really core issue in autism. So depending on where you go, I travel a lot. I see families and clients all over the country. And I've updated my knowledge along the way, that is for sure. I've learned a lot about airports, I've learned a lot about packing. And it's never vacation though, actually. That would be a different thought process. But I'm thinking, okay, for certain airports, getting there 2 hours early is okay, but for some airports it's 1. I've developed the what in certain situations because I've kept my experiences in my mind and I've been able to apply them to future scenarios and I use them to plan and evaluate. And again, that's just something very difficult for individuals on the spectrum. And again, where it's tricky is you have these teens and adults, the observable behavior tells you one thing, the brain behavior is actually something very different. Anything else to add about planning a vacation? Anyone want to take a vacation? Actually, Susan, you're like all over that.
Well, you might think about what worked before and what didn't based on past.
Yes, thinking about what worked before and what didn't based on past trips. Yeah, and that's how you make decisions about your future planning. Whether it's planning a vacation or approaching a person, making friends, communicating. We're constantly evaluating what is working for us and what is not. We're able to update and then apply.
And again, that's where it becomes important to come back to the question of why, because what worked before, getting there an hour early, may not work next time, just because last time you traveled on a very low, unbusy day, and the next time you're traveling on a holiday weekend. So security lines are going to be twice as long. So again, it comes back to the question of why. What worked before, and why did it work before? Why was that the right choice to make in that situation?
Okay. Should we do that or should we move on? All right. All right. So let's shift our thinking about the what and the why into specifically communication. And so Paul and I were building this PowerPoint. We were thinking about, okay, because this is a breakdown that happens constantly. Hi, Dr. Shealy. Good to see you. So this happens frequently. And so we were thinking about, from my perspective, if I were to hear the phrase, I need this done for next week, what are some things that I may be considering? I would understand that there's something to be done. I would be able to interpret the person's intention, or infer their stress level about it. I would be able to say, okay, I'm going to take that as something that I need to get done quickly in order to support them, in their feelings, what they need, things like that. So these are 3 things that I would be thinking, but I would be accounting for multiple things at the same time, and I'd be able to read that intention behind the language.
Meanwhile, the me of 6 or 7 years ago would probably just think, I need this done for next week. So I would say, okay, next week is Sunday, next time I see them is Monday, so I need to have this ready by Monday. Now, the me now would think, why do they need this done for next week? If I'm in a business environment, maybe they have a meeting on Monday that they need to present it at. So if they need it for next week, maybe I should have it to them earlier so they can go over it and look for things I need to change or fix. That the awareness of why they need it changes entirely the context of what I'm actually doing. To me, initially, the old me, what I'm doing is whatever this is, this thing that needs to be done. But the new me, what I'm doing is making sure that they're in the situation that they want to be in at that time. So I need to be aware that what they're telling me isn't just get this done. What they're telling me is that I have something this needs to be done for, I want to be ready for it. It's almost a completely different communication than the actual content of the sentence. And this issue of what they're saying and why they're saying it applies so much to communication, because if you aren't aware that communication is more about intent than what's stated, then you don't get anywhere. And it's really hard to understand this difference between intent and content, especially when a lot of times the people who are communicating aren't necessarily aware that they're communicating both levels of things, where that it comes so naturally that it's hard to take that step back and go, well, what am I really asking this person to do for me?
Right. I mean, it's so unconscious. We don't even realize. I mean, we're taking it all as one package. So we have language as a communication tool. We have nonverbal communication. We have tone. We have gestures. We have all of those things that we've learned to integrate into one package, and that's just what's normal for us. And so think about your teens and adults that are presenting themselves in ways, especially when they have a lot of language, and you're like going, okay, why aren't you getting this? But the thing is that communication is 80% nonverbal and 10%, oh no, Sue, help me out. One thing I forget.
It's about
Gestural.
70%.
70%? Okay, she's the speech pathologist. But 90% of communication really is the nonverbal. And so it's really important that you account for that and say, okay, I need to start being aware of the fact that, what I'm communicating and what this person may be getting from it is very different.
And then, again, the nonverbal, I see someone who is very visibly angry. Again, 5 years ago, I wouldn't have asked why they're angry. I would have just started trying to do whatever I thought was the process for calming someone down, which may or may not work, because sometimes people are angry and they want you to share that anger, that they're outraged about something. They don't want you to try to say, well, it's not really a big deal, or anything like that. And then other times, that's the right response. So again, with communication, the nonverbal as well, it helps to understand that everything has a why. That again, for the person on the spectrum especially, that repeated message of anytime you encounter something, try to think of the why. It takes a while to learn to do that, and so on. But being aware of that really helps. And I just suddenly lost what I was about to say.
Okay, when you find it, you can throw it.
Go ahead.
Okay. So here we are. We're at an RDI conference, and I know we've done presentations before. We always give out our feedback sheets, and people always want tips. So like, how do we do this? And the thing is, I can't really give you that specifically for a few reasons. One is I don't know your individual family, your child, you, things like that. I can give you things to think about, so I can plant some seeds for you on that. But really, the best thing you should do is work with a consultant to help you evaluate, where your family's at, where your adult child's at, in order to guide you in the most appropriate way. And so you want to learn about that with a consultant. Some principles that I follow as I'm a direct therapist to a lot of my teen and adult clients, as well as working with families. But one thing that I've gotten in the habit of is not to assume that the individual understands the why of what they're doing, seeing or experiencing. Now, on the flip side of that, I also work with some teens and adults that are very severely impaired in other ways. So physically, they may seem like, do they know anything? I mean, and I mean that respectfully. It's just very hard to tell based on their physical things. So on the flip side of that, I don't assume that in that way either. I don't assume because that person is having some physical or observable challenges that means they don't know anything. So I focus on the why quite often. And something that you end up learning to do in the RDA program is becoming input-focused versus output-focused. And Dr. Gutstein spoke about that yesterday. It's a really tough thing to do. It's probably the hardest transition, to make when learning to be a guide. But you have to remember, I've used this example for a long time, and I think it's the best. I can't really come up with another one. But if you think about a computer, and you want programs on your computer to run, in order for that to happen, you have to install the software. You have to input things into the computer to get back what you're wanting from it. And it's the same way with your guiding. Expecting things to come out that haven't been inputted or installed, it's not going to work. It's going to end up crashing and failing. So you want to become input-focused versus output-focused. Another huge principle you'll learn in RDI is slowing down, slowing way down. Just when you thought you slowed down, you haven't. You're going to slow down more, like snail pace. The reason for that is in order to be a deliberate guide and to teach process-oriented thinking, you have to be very aware and deliberate about observing yourself and being aware of what you're thinking and become skilled at being able to pause and evaluate before you take an action or before you are about to teach something. So it's really important to slow down. And I threw in here, again, highlighting the why. It never hurts to explain why. In fact, it's really good. So again, not assuming, I'd rather you say it, this is why I'm thinking this, or this is why I chose this, than not to. Because it puts you kind of on an equal ground. Because then okay, at least we got that, we're on the same page. Because a lot of times you're not on the same page and you don't know it. So that's really important. The final thing that I do, and some of you who know me know that this is just like part of my being now, is communicating with I statements or I thoughts. And I know Rick is nodding. And I statements are things that you're sharing. So you begin your communications with I. Like, okay, I'm noticing that that plant looks really dry. I see that your face is getting red. It looks like maybe you're getting upset. You're basically sharing what's in your head to provide perspective. Because remember, the person on the spectrum isn't able to read it. So sometimes, without telling, you want to share, this is my thought process. This is how I'm thinking about it. And a phrase that I use a lot with my clients is, I want to understand you better. I want you to understand me better. I don't think we're understanding each other very well, and I really want to. And so I use a lot of I statements and I thoughts, and it also helps me as a guide to stay on the right track, because that's input focused. That's me sharing perspective. That's me sharing things that they may not be picking up.
So one of the things we're father is extremely fond of telling me when we do our radio show is the meaning of communication is the response that you get. That communication, in large part, is about how the other person receives it, that it is not independent of the other person. To me, it felt for the longest time like communication was supposed to be independent of the other person. A sentence is concrete. What you say means what you said. If I say I'm having a bad day, that means I'm having a bad day, but to someone else it might mean, why don't you cheer me up? If I say, what time are you planning to have dinner, to me that means, what time are you planning to have dinner? To someone else that might mean, I'm kind of hungry and thinking about food right now. Are we planning to have dinner anytime soon? So there's this awareness that needs to be, created, that communication is in part about the response that you get from the other person. But it also goes one step further, that if you don't get the response that you want, my immediate response would be, well, maybe you didn't understand me. But that's offensive. That's something that someone's probably going to get upset if you tell it to them. So that the method of communication becomes, well, maybe I didn't express myself clearly. So communication is this situation where it's almost entirely about the other person's responses and what's happening internally, which, as you may know, may be something a little hard for someone on the spectrum to pick up on. So communication becomes a bit of a problem just because it's all about creating the response you want, and that requires a deeper understanding of the other person than we often have.
And I just want to add a couple of clients that I have who aren't able to, I guess who don't have the strength in expressive communication. They may ask me something, and I'll respond, but there was more to it and they couldn't express it the way they wanted, so they'll repeat the same question over and over. And I'm just like, I don't understand. I hear what you're saying, I hear you repeating, but there's got to be something more to it. And what I found is a lot of times when I hear, not every time, when I hear repeating, a lot of times there is something more, but the person's unaware, either assuming, okay, maybe she didn't hear me, or maybe I need to say it again, or maybe I need to say it louder, things like that, and then she'll get it instead of self-adjusting, instead of realizing, okay, I've communicated, I'm taking in this person's response, and I need to adjust, and they either can't or they don't realize it, or they just start doing the same over and over again.
So there are a few things we really, really want you to remember from this talk. And the top of the list here is that there is a condition beneath the symptoms. That autism expresses itself as a list of symptoms, but every single one of those symptoms has an internal cause of some sort. And that if you start really looking at and addressing those internal causes, you'll be decreasing the symptoms. Now, some symptoms are obviously need immediate addressing. If they're hurting themselves, if they're hurting people around them, if they're causing real problems, you need to address the symptoms. But for a longer-term gain, finding and evaluating the condition beneath the symptoms and looking for treatments that help both sides of the equation are going to create a sort of a higher quality of life for the person on the spectrum. That if they understand the world around them more thoroughly rather than just as training in what to do and what not to do, they're going to be a lot less depressed, a lot less anxious, and believe me, I've struggled with all of those over the years. That it really does help to finally start developing this understanding of what's really going on and what's going wrong, and why I'm supposed to do these things that I didn't previously understand I was supposed to do. So every behavior, everything a person does, anytime, no matter what, there is both a what they're doing and a why they're doing it. And being able to look at everything as those two parts and really think about them as those two parts as you go really helps you express to someone on the spectrum what's going on around them. That I'm not just mowing the lawn, I'm mowing the lawn because we like to have our lawn look nice, or it's healthier for the lawn because if it gets overgrown, we get bugs, we get snakes, we get whatever. That understanding the reason for it, and not just you're supposed to mow the lawn every week, really helps to develop the ability to make your own decisions. That when you're off on your own, if you know you're supposed to mow the lawn every week, well, maybe you're not supposed to if it's a different type of grass or whatever. So understanding why we do these things really helps develop the ability to create a process for your own problem solving and your own conscious evaluation of the world around you. So this comes back to the idea that skills are separate from what and why. That a lot of therapies do teach these skills. They teach the ability to look people in the eyes. They teach the ability to say, how are you doing, or regular social filler, I almost think of it as. But everything has the what and the why, and someone who has these skills, most people I meet wouldn't immediately assume that I'm on the autism spectrum. I've met a few people who have Asperger's who immediately can tell because of the way I structure some of my sentences and ask certain questions, because I tend to be very careful with my word choice. But most of the people, a lot of my friends even didn't realize I had it because I'd forgotten to mention it to them. A lot of them knew because I'm pretty open about it. But the thing is that someone can appear completely able to handle life around them when really they are just barely keeping their head above water because they don't understand the why of everything they're doing. They know what to do, but anytime the situation strolls a little too far from that script that they've got in their heads, they can't adapt it because they don't know why they're doing these things. They just know what they're supposed to do, and if that doesn't work, they can't adapt it. So understanding this why really helps add flexibility, just because it gives you another starting point to fall back to. When things go wrong, you go back to why was I doing that in the first place? And that helps you come up with a new plan.
And again, it's very important that you work with a professional who can help you evaluate not just behavior, but your family situation. Because remember, not everything is autism. And that's kind of another issue, not just with teens and adults, but remember, people have personalities. People are just who they are. And you don't want to clump everything into everything that's you don't like or that doesn't work is autism, because that's not the case. So it really helps to have a professional who can help you evaluate behavior and your family situation in a very balanced way and help you prioritize what to work on first. Because as Paul said, if you have situations that need to be addressed first, and most of the time you do, you've got to get those under control before moving on to more of the remediation piece. So, we're not going to be redundant here at all, but never assume that a person who has the skills automatically knows the why. The why matters. It aids in true understanding and application. So, that's something that we really wanted to emphasize. We're going to take some questions. Before we do it, please do remember to fill out your evaluation forms. We really appreciate constructive feedback and questions.
We'll be answering some questions on our show next week as well, if we get evaluation form questions that we don't get to here. We also will answer them on our Facebook. The business card and elsewhere all have information for how to get in contact with us. So does anyone have any questions?
I just wanted to know a little more about the 47-year-old man. I just want to...
The 47-year-old man? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just like, how's he doing? And
Oh, well, he's new for me.
Okay.
He's fairly new. It's a little bit complicated. That's nice of you to ask. I mean, at this point, he's actually still trying to accept the fact that he has Asperger's. It's very difficult for him because he just got diagnosed, and he has this strong value that he does not want help. He doesn't want help. He doesn't want to accept help. He wants to do it on his own, and it's at this point just helping him to understand that there are some things he can't control, and there are some things that he can't help. And so that's kind of where I'm at with him, is just understanding that getting help or asking for help does not mean you're weak, or that you're, anything less than just a person who is having a challenge. So, Gail? Oh.
Mine is really just, I don't want to take up any other person's time, but if you could just spend like a minute talking about trust, because that's really where you are with your 47-year-old.
Yes, yeah, that's part of it for sure. With this 47-year-old that I'm working with, him trusting me is a huge thing actually, because if you think about too with teens and adults, they've had a lot of interactive failures in a way where things just didn't go right, and so it's a perceived failure for them. And so sometimes it's very hard to trust a person and feel comfortable working alongside them, and this is very personal one-on-one work. And so just like, just for us, we'd want to feel comfortable with the person that we're working with. And for him, being 47 and having a lifetime of really bad interactions with others, it makes more sense to me now why he came in yelling at me when I first met him. I think he just had the assumption that I'd just be like everybody else, misunderstand him, get mad at him, file a sexual harassment suit, which some people did, at one time. Whole other long story. We can talk more about it later if you want. But yeah, I mean, just developing trust and focusing on relationships, because this is about learning through relationships. So trust is a very critical component. Yes.
I have a 21-year-old that loves to be on a social network online, and I try to incorporate chores around the house to keep him active. I mean, so to help the household, and I have been letting him do it on his own time. But sometimes, I mean, if I need help physically, I have a bad back, and I'll ask for his help. And I'm not explaining the why, but you know, he knows I have an injured back. At least I assume that he knows this. And he may lose track, and he'll spend a couple hours before he even gets offline to help me with something.
I would remind him of the injured back, honestly. That's one of the things is that I have a hard time making connections.
Uh-huh.
So, you know, were I to know you had the injured back, when you say you need help, I may not think of it at the time. It's not there in my mind, that connection of asking, why does he need help? Because that's just one of those things, is I don't ask why unless I tell myself to ask why. And he may not be asking why, so he may not make that connection of, he's got the bad back, he really needs help. So I really would work on sort of just integrating that somehow. My back's really bothering me today, could you help me with this? Or just include it in the statement in a way that doesn't feel like you're beating him over the head with it, but a way that makes sure it's conscious in his mind.
And another thing I would add to that really is, remember, sometimes there's sort of a processing delay and trouble prioritizing in the moment. And so I may give him like a heads up, you know, 10 minutes before,
Yeah.
you know, hey, I'm going to be working on this and I'm feeling really sore. So in about 10 minutes, I'd really appreciate it, you know, if you could help. So giving him kind of that heads up and time to process and, you know, think about it a little bit is probably a good idea too.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm also
Oh.
wondering if he knows you need now.
Oh.
Yeah. Well, sometimes I'm sure I don't express myself clearly enough at times, and then
Yeah, because that's often a common issue, is they don't know you mean now.
yeah.
That's a good point
Several
too.
hours later.
Yeah,
it'll be
well,
fine.
because reading the sense of urgency. I mean, so yeah, if you were telling me that, I would be able to process, oh, he's like in the middle of this and he's struggling. So I'd reprioritize. I'd say this is a now thing, my computer's a later thing.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? So that's a really good point. Yeah. Yes.
Can you say more what you meant by input focus versus output? Because we've been doing this for quite a while, but I haven't heard those terms.
Oh, okay. Well, what I mean by being input focused is focusing on really, creating experiences and helping them to kind of come to their own conclusions and learning about it, where you're guiding them. You're guiding them, you're providing insight, you're spotlighting things that are relevant. You're clarifying things a lot of times, because if you don't clarify and then the output's kind of funny, like coming out like, why is this not working? A lot of times it's an input issue. They didn't know. So I kind of think of it, I guess, as clarifying things, creating opportunities for them for us in a guided relationship, to make sure that we're on the same page and not to move ahead until we're on that same page, and that the information that I'm aware of in that moment is shared or inputted so that we're both seeing the same things. Yes.
Could you just give an example of that, like what it looks like, what it sounds like, of input,
Yeah. Well, I'm thinking of your example right here with your back. If I was in your house with you at that time, and that was happening, I might say something like, wow, I see your dad really struggling, and making it a point to share that insight, because at that moment, that's something he's not aware of. So when I think of input, I think of it as, what am I seeing that this person's not seeing, and how can I input that to them? What's relevant in this moment that I'm able to prioritize? Hi, Steve. That they're not seeing, that I can provide that insight for them. So that's what I mean by input, is spotlighting what's relevant in that moment. So it looks like we have to leave the podium for Dr. Yasteen to come up. But please do give your evaluation forms to the the blonde woman in the back. And thank you so much for coming. Really appreciate it.